The chamber just witnessed something absolutely unprecedented, something so brutal, so utterly devastating that Labour MPs literally got up and walked out in the middle of the session. They couldn't take it anymore. They couldn't sit there and watch their government get systematically demolished because Nigel Farage just delivered the most savage takedown in parliamentary history. 1 minute ago, he stood up and unleashed absolute hell on Keir Starmer and his corrupt, failing government. And what he exposed was so damning, so undeniable that there was no defence, no comeback, no way to spin it. Labour MPs sat there in silence as Farage tore apart every lie, every failure, every betrayal. You could see the shame on their faces, the embarrassment, the desperate desire to be anywhere else but in that chamber, listening to the truth about what they've done to this country. And then they started leaving one by one at first, then in groups, walking out while Farage was still speaking because they couldn't handle hearing the facts, couldn't handle facing the consequences of their actions. It was political cowardice on full display. The governing party literally fleeing from accountability, running away from the truth, abandoning the chamber in disgrace rather than sitting there and answering for their failures. The Speaker tried to call them back, tried to restore order, but they kept walking, kept leaving, until the Labour benches were half empty and everyone remaining looked like they wanted to disappear. This has never happened before. MPs don't just walk out during important parliamentary business. They don't flee from debate. They don't run away from scrutiny, but that's exactly what just happened. Because what Farage revealed was so explosive, so absolutely devastating, that staying and facing it was impossible. The evidence of corruption, the proof of lies, like the documentation of betrayal, all laid out in meticulous detail with no way to deny it. Starmer sat there looking like a man who's just watched his entire world collapse. His face was pale, his hands were shaking. Every word from Farage was like a knife twisting in his gut. And his MPs, the ones who are supposed to support him, defend him, stand with him, couldn't do it. They abandoned him, left him sitting there alone while Farage destroyed him piece by piece. Right now, the footage is spreading across every platform. Millions of people are watching Labour MPs walk out in disgrace. News channels are scrambling to cover the most dramatic parliamentary session in modern history. And political analysts are saying this could be the moment that ends Starmer's government, because you can't come back from this. You can't recover when your own MPs won't even stay in the chamber to defend you, when the truth is so damaging that the only response is to run away. This is complete political annihilation. And it all happened 1 minute ago. The session started normally enough. Routine parliamentary business, MPs filing in, the usual noise and chatter. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Nigel Farage had been scheduled to speak, but there was no indication this would be anything other than standard political debate. How wrong everyone was. Because when Farage stood up and began speaking, it became immediately clear that something major was happening. His tone was different, more aggressive, more focused, like a prosecutor about to present evidence in a murder trial. And the first words out of his mouth silenced the entire chamber. He said he had proof of systematic corruption at the highest levels of government. Not speculation, not allegations, proof, documents that would expose exactly how Starmer's government has been lying to the British people and enriching their cronies at taxpayer expense. The atmosphere changed instantly. Labour MPs who had been chatting and laughing went silent. Starmer's face hardened. The Speaker leaned forward, paying close attention, because everyone knew this was about to get very serious very quickly. And Farage didn't disappoint. He pulled out a folder thick with documents and he started going through them one by one. Company names, contract amounts, dates of contracts awarded, names of company directors, and then the connections, the donations those companies made to the Labour Party, the personal relationships between company executives and Labour ministers, the timeline showing donations followed immediately by lucrative government contracts. The pattern was undeniable and absolutely damning. This wasn't conspiracy theory, this was documented fact. Farage didn't rush. He took his time, made sure every single detail was heard and understood. called out specific ministers by name, asked them directly to explain the connections, to justify why companies run by their friends and donors kept winning government contracts. And the silence from the Labour benches was deafening. Nobody stood up to defend it, and nobody offered explanations. They just sat there in mortified silence as the corruption was exposed for the entire country to see. Because what could they say? The documents spoke for themselves. The connections were clear. The corruption was obvious. Any attempt to deny or justify it would only make things worse. Then Farage moved to the second part of his assault, the policy failures that have devastated British communities. And this is where you started to see Labour MPs squirming in their seats, because these weren't abstract statistics or economic theories. These were real stories about real people whose lives have been destroyed by this government's incompetence. Farage talked about the pensioner who froze to death in her home because she couldn't afford heating after Labour cut winter fuel payments. He read her name, told her story, explained how she'd worked her entire life and paid into the system, only to be abandoned by the government when she needed help most. And he asked Starmer directly how he sleeps at night and knowing his policies killed that woman. The emotional impact was devastating. You could see MPs looking down at their papers, unable to meet anyone's eyes, because they knew it was true. They knew their policies had real consequences for real people. And hearing those consequences spelled out so clearly, so personally, was unbearable. Farage then talked about the small business owner who killed himself after his company collapsed under the weight of new regulations and taxes. A man who'd built a successful business over decades, who employed dozens of people, who contributed to his community, destroyed by government policies that made it impossible to continue. Farage had the suicide note, and he read excerpts from it. The man's desperation, his sense of betrayal, his conclusion that the government he'd trusted had destroyed everything he'd worked for. It was absolutely gutting. Labour MPs started shifting in their seats. Some were looking at the exits. You could see the calculation happening. Do I sit here and continue listening to this? Do I stay and be associated with these failures, or do I leave? The first MP to walk out did it quietly, tried to be subtle about it. But Farage noticed immediately, pointed it out, asked why that MP was leaving, whether they couldn't handle hearing the truth about what their government had done. And that broke the dam, because once one person left, others felt they could too. And suddenly there was a steady stream of Labour MPs heading for the doors. Not running exactly, but walking quickly, eyes down, trying not to draw attention. But everyone noticed. The opposition benches erupted in jeers and shouts. The Speaker called for order, but the exodus continued. Farage kept talking through all of this. Didn't stop, didn't pause. Just kept exposing failure after failure while Labour MPs fled. He talked about the immigration crisis and the communities destroyed by policies nobody voted for, about schools where British children are now minorities, about hospitals overwhelmed because the system was never designed to handle these numbers, about crime rising because police are stretched too thin, about social cohesion breaking down as different groups refuse to integrate. And with each example, another few Labour MPs would get up and leave, unable or unwilling to sit there and defend the indefensible. The ones who remained looked absolutely miserable, trapped between loyalty to their party and the obvious truth of what was being said. Starmer himself sat rigid, staring straight ahead, not looking at Farage, not acknowledging the exodus happening behind him, just sitting there like a statue while his government crumbled. And Farage noticed this too, commented on it, asked why the Prime Minister wouldn't even look at him, whether it was shame, whether it was guilt, whether it was the knowledge that everything being said was true and there was no defence. The psychological warfare was masterful. Every comment designed to maximise discomfort and highlight the moral bankruptcy of the government. Then Farage moved to the ultimate betrayal, the secret negotiations to reverse Brexit. And this is when even more Labour MPs headed for the exits. Because this touches the rawest nerve in British politics, the democratic vote that was supposed to be respected, the promise that Brexit meant Brexit, and the revelation that it was all lies. that while telling the public they respected the referendum result, the government was working secretly to undo it. Farage had the documents, the evidence of secret meetings, the draft agreements, the commitments made to Brussels without parliamentary approval, and he went through them systematically, showing exactly how Starmer planned to surrender British sovereignty piece by piece while lying about it the whole time. The chamber was half empty now. The Labour benches that started the session full were decimated. MPs who remained looked shell-shocked. Some were clearly angry at Starmer for putting them in this position. Others looked defeated, already knowing their political careers were likely over. Because how do you go back to your constituency after this? How do you face voters who just watched you sit there while your government's corruption and failures were exposed? How do you explain why you didn't walk out in protest or stand up and demand accountability? The ones who left can at least claim they refused to be part of it, but the ones who stayed will be associated with everything that was revealed. It's a no-win situation created entirely by Starmer's incompetence and dishonesty. Farage then did something brilliant. He started addressing the empty seats, talking to the MPs who'd left, asking why they ran away, whether they were ashamed, whether they knew defending this government was impossible. He pointed out that their cowardice spoke louder than any defence they could have offered, that by fleeing, they'd admitted everything he said was true, because innocent people don't run. People with good answers don't hide. Only the guilty flee from accountability. And by walking out, Labour MPs had confessed their guilt to the entire nation. The political devastation was complete. The media reaction was instantaneous. News channels cut to live coverage. Political correspondents were describing it as unprecedented. Constitutional experts were discussing what it meant for parliamentary democracy when the governing party literally abandons the chamber during scrutiny. Social media exploded with footage of Labour MPs walking out. The hashtags were brutal. The commentary was savage. And public opinion was turning even more against Labour with every passing minute, because people could see it with their own eyes, could see their elected representatives running away from accountability, could see the government that's supposed to serve them treating parliamentary scrutiny with contempt. Opposition MPs were loving every second. The Conservative benches were cheering. Cheering. Liberal Democrats were calling points of order, demanding Labour MPs return. The SNP was calling for emergency debates. Everyone could smell blood in the water, and they were circling, because this kind of weakness invites attack. This kind of vulnerability creates opportunities. And every opposition party was already planning how to exploit this disaster for maximum political gain. The Prime Minister's questions coming up would be absolutely brutal. Every debate from now on would reference this moment. Every challenge to Labour's credibility would point to the day their MPs fled the chamber in disgrace. Starmer finally tried to respond when Farage finished, but his rebuttal was pathetic, weak, defensive. He accused Farage of theatrics and distortion, claimed the documents were being misrepresented, attacked the motivations behind the revelations. But he didn't actually deny the substance, didn't refute the specific allegations, didn't explain the contracts or the connections or the secret Brexit negotiations. Just vague attacks and deflections that convinced nobody. And when he sat down, the silence from his own benches was damning. No cheers, no support, just embarrassed silence from the few Labour MPs who'd remained. Even they couldn't bring themselves to defend him. The Speaker then had to address the elephant in the room, the fact that dozens of MPs had walked out during active parliamentary business. He called it concerning and inappropriate, said he would be reviewing whether any rules had been broken. But what could he really do? There's no rule that says MPs have to stay and listen to criticism, no punishment for leaving the chamber. The precedent was set, and it's a dangerous one. Because if MPs can just walk out whenever they're confronted with uncomfortable truths, then parliamentary accountability means nothing. The whole system depends on members being willing to face scrutiny, to answer questions, to defend their positions, and Labour just demonstrated they're not willing to do that. The backbench Labour MPs who remained are reportedly furious not at Farage but at Starmer, because he's the one who put them in this impossible position. He's the one whose corruption and failures were exposed. He's the one whose secret Brexit dealings betrayed the party's own voters, and now they're all tainted by association, their political futures damaged by his actions. Some are already privately calling for him to resign. Others are discussing whether to trigger a leadership challenge. The party is eating itself from within, and the public spectacle of MPs fleeing the chamber has accelerated the collapse. International coverage has been extensive and humiliating for Britain. Foreign media are portraying this as evidence of political chaos, of a governing party in meltdown, of democratic institutions failing. The footage of MPs walking out is being broadcast around the world with commentary about British political dysfunction. Our allies are concerned, our adversaries are delighted. And Britain's reputation as a stable democracy with functioning institutions takes another hit, all because Starmer's government is so corrupt and incompetent that his own MPs can't even sit through a parliamentary session where their failures are exposed. The long-term damage from this single session is incalculable. Trust in Labour will drop even further. Already low faith in politicians generally will crater. The belief that Parliament holds government accountable will be shaken because people just watched the governing party flee from accountability. And Starmer personally will never recover from the image of sitting there alone while his MPs abandoned him and Farage destroyed his credibility. This is the kind of moment that defines political careers, that gets replayed in documentaries and history books. That becomes the symbol of everything that was wrong with a failed government. And it happened 1 minute ago. The obliteration is complete. The disgrace is total. And there's no coming back from this.